Hi, this is Kyle again, and we're going to talk here about the tkinter package for making user interfaces in Python, as well as some properties of the various widgets we can make with tkinter. It says here, tkinter is a standard tool. Well, it's a package you can import for creating user interfaces, and it says with Python, but technically tkinter gives you access to a library called tk, which is short for toolkit, and that can even be used with some other programming languages like Ruby, but that's not important. There are many packages that can be used to make user interfaces with Python, and we had to choose one. We chose tkinter just because it's available by default with a Python installation, and we didn't want everyone to have to go and download something else, so we really chose it out of convenience. It's not the only way, and it's almost definitely not the best way. Personally, I don't even like it, but there are reasons we're using it, and that's not a terrible thing. To import the tkinter package, right at the start of your Python code file, right after your comment header, you import it. The typical way you'll do this is coding from tkinter import star, meaning import the entire package. We talked about common elements of a user interface in the prior video, and I used vague terms to refer to some of these, such as elements or components or controls. But the actual term used for any item added to a user interface when you're working with tkinter is widget. However, this term isn't universal across user interface design, so sometimes other professors and I will still say things like control. Personally, I tend to say control because this is the terminology Microsoft usually uses. We had a big list of controls, or widgets, in the prior video, and some of these widgets have different properties. So here's labels. Labels are arguably the most basic and straightforward widget because they're mostly used to display text on the screen. In the applications we looked at in the prior video, a label is most like the part of the character map application that says characters to copy. Labels have a lot of properties, actually, but some of the most common ones are listed here. You can set the text in the label, you can set a border on the label, and if you don't set a border, it just doesn't have a border, which is fine in a lot of cases. You can also adjust a label's size. This isn't all of them, by the way. Now here are a list of some properties for buttons. Buttons are usually used to be clicked or otherwise activated, and that causes something else to happen. They generally have text on them, but sometimes it's an image. The only real difference between the common properties listed here and the ones for the label on the prior slide is the command, which references an actual function that clicking the button will execute. You should know that exists, but we're not really going to emphasize functions yet. And now we've got a list of properties for an entry, which is what tkinter calls the things that most of us would probably call a text box. An entry object is an open space where the user can type text. You'll see these properties are almost entirely the same too. And again, these aren't all of the properties, but it's a reasonable cross-section of the most common ones. Although it's nice to briefly list the kinds of properties that exist for these most common controls, the real point there was showing how many of the properties of tkinter widgets are the same. If you think you'll need some other property, you may need to look that up. It would be silly to give a comprehensive reference to that here. It would take ages to discuss all of the possibilities, and you really don't need it. If there is something that you do need that isn't explicitly covered in our course content, a quick Google search for a subject like tkinter checkbox would surely return some well-maintained pages that list the various properties and uses for a checkbox, for example. The other thing with widgets is that we have to name them. So this slide has an example of Hello World using tkinter. I'd really like for you to put this code into Python verbatim and run this yourself. For real, right now. This is valuable because then you'll have an example of working tkinter code, and it will also help in that unlikely scenario that, for some reason, your Python installation might have errors that prevent tkinter from working. It would be way better to know that right now rather than a week from now. So please, seriously, write these 5 lines of code and try this out for yourself. Now where's the object we had to name here? There's actually 2 of them. In tkinter, we have to name the user interface itself, and that's an instance of tkinter. That's why there's a line that says winter equals tk. This means create a new user interface named window. If you're looking at demo code online, people will sometimes use different names for this type of thing. Some will use root, some will use main window, some will use top, etc. And it doesn't really matter, but I like being descriptive, and we're not working with more than one window at once, so I call mine window. The next thing that I'm naming like a variable is my label. Recall that PEP8 has us naming things using lowercase and optionally with underscores between the words. So this label is being created named myLabel, and it's being assigned to the UI instance named window, and given a text property of hello world. Then it's being packed into the UI, and the UI starts running. There we go. It's a beautiful user interface-based application. Of course, we could add a lot more to this, and we will. So in this video, we talked about widget properties in tkinter, and some things you should know at this point are what is tkinter, how can you import tkinter, and what property of a widget is used for indicating a specific string to be displayed inside that widget. That shouldn't be too hard. In the next video, we'll talk about planning for a user interface.